Hi everyone, welcome to the NDIS Circle. I'm Dan McCutcheon. Today I wanted to talk about the current state of the NDIS and the disability sector. There's been heaps of huge changes recently. We've seen providers exiting the market. We've seen a new update of the NDIS pricing arrangements and price limits. And I just wanted to touch on that. We've seen some, obviously the wider economic climate of the cost of living, higher inflation. It's all having flow-on effects to providers and the market, and then ultimately to participants receiving supports as well. So I just wanted to talk about where the current state of the NDIS is, some challenges, and what we can sort of do from here, and what I'm seeing anyway from my vantage point. So the disability sector in Australia has undergone really significant disruption and change over the last sort of 10 years or so since I've been working in the sector. In that period, I've worked in the WA state government block-funded Disability Services Commission model, then as a local coordinator in the WA own version of the NDIS, and then finally in the nationally consistent NDIS and the subsequent iterations of that. While the NDIS has been transformative for hundreds of thousands of people with disability in Australia, it's also not been without its challenges like any significant reform. Some of the main challenges are obviously the sustainability of the scheme gets talked about a lot in the media, and the financial cost of the NDIS being much larger than we'd initially thought. Lack of consistency, complexity of the system, people not being able to navigate the system independently, skilled workforce shortages, fraud and unethical behaviour, which is another media that gets a lot of media coverage, and in more recent times there's been price limit freezes, I think over half a decade, for therapy, general therapy like occupational therapy and speech pathology, and also for support coordination. So particularly with higher inflation and higher cost of living, we've seen some provider closures and exits as well off the back of that update in July. And then, of course, sitting alongside this is the recent independent NDIS review done by the original architects of the scheme, sort of aimed at getting the NDIS back on track. And that's recommended significant changes aimed at enhancing the NDIS's sustainability for future generations, and also making it more efficient and ethical. So while those recommendations, which are just recommendations at this stage, promise some long-term benefits and positives, they also present some immediate challenges and disruption and change as well that both providers and NDIS participants are going to need to navigate. So some key recommendations from the independent review: they focus on improving outcomes for NDIS participants, streamlining processes, and ensuring financial sustainability. So these changes are expected to address systemic issues such as long wait times, inconsistent plan approvals and funding decisions, and high variability in provider and support coordinator quality and compliance. And I think for providers, this really necessitates a shift in operations. So enhanced focus on participant outcomes for providers means that we must adopt a more personalized and responsive and innovative and agile service delivery model. While this is beneficial for participants, it requires significant investment on the part of the provider in staff training, leveraging technology, continuous improvement, and sort of redesigning our processes. A key recommendation out of the review is mandatory NDIS registration or enrolment for all NDIS providers. At the moment, the vast majority of NDIS providers are unregistered. I think there's maybe around 170,000 NDIS providers, of which approximately 15,000 of those are registered. So you can see the vast majority of providers are unregistered. And this recommendation aims to improve consistency and regulation across the whole disability sector, and ensuring that all providers meet the same criteria for safety and continuous improvement and professionalism. For small independent providers, mandatory registration represents both a challenge and an opportunity. All compliance requirements will mean higher costs and administrative burden. Meeting those standards when many providers will likely exit the marketplace or won't pass registration will mean that you'll have potentially more credibility, and then more participants will be coming to you to receive support. On the other hand, larger not-for-profits, I think, are really struggling. They're facing dual pressures of adhering to regulations and rising operational costs, while also managing shrinking profit margins with those fixed price limits. And I think the not-for-profit structure is it's really difficult to survive and to thrive in the individualized support model. And I've seen a few not-for-profits exit the marketplace recently. They're not able to continue operations with the new regulations, and that's leading to market exits and consolidations. Some disability organisations and advocates are calling for a 1% loading for registered providers, which could go some way to making up financially for that increased compliance and regulatory costs associated with registration. The NDIS, the marketplace, is also starting to really mature. It's been, I think it rolled out originally in 2013, so it's been 11 years. And the marketplace is starting to mature. There's increased competition and higher expectations of service quality, and also a shift towards more innovative and different service delivery models rather than just your cookie cutter approach. I think as providers, we need to increasingly look to technology to improve our service delivery and really listen to participant feedback and engagement to improve our services. Participant-driven support models are also becoming more common, and these innovations not only can enhance accessibility for participants, but it can also help providers to manage our costs and to improve efficiency. With the recent NDIS pricing arrangements and price limits, price freezes, many business models have been unable to adapt to the new economic realities, particularly affecting therapy and support coordination. It's hit providers really hard, and I've seen a wave of closures among providers following that update, with the costs of operational costs rising, cost of living being higher inflation, profit margins are really being squeezed. Large not-for-profits, once the backbone really of disability service delivery, are now facing unprecedented financial pressures. Many have had to close their doors or significantly scale back their services, reducing the availability of experienced and trusted providers in the market. Providers must now find ways to deliver high quality services within constrained budgets. So this often means adopting lean business practices, maybe scaling back some middle management and some non-revenue generating positions, investing in technology, and potentially merging, acquiring other organizations, or just collaborating to share back office costs and sharing that cost of administrative burden across a few different organizations while supporting the same amount of participants and maintaining the same revenue. Another key recommendation coming out of the NDIS review, which is affecting the overall landscape at the moment, is the transition from support coordination, what we do at Circle SC, to NDIS navigation. It's not really clear what this is going to look like. It's not really clear when this is going to happen, but we are seeing off the back again of the price freeze on support coordination for over half a decade, that many support coordination companies are closing their doors, and this is leading to mergers and acquisitions and consolidations, like I mentioned. So this support coordination space is really one to watch. The NDIS review recommends that when we do transition to the navigation model, navigation organisations will be subject to a tender process. This could look like a list of approved navigation organisations that NDIS participants and families can then make a selection from. And the navigator organisations, another part of the recommendation is that we'll work in physical hubs near other providers, or potentially sharing space with other providers where participants and families can actually come into a physical office and meet with their navigator. Training and continuous improvement might be delivered by the NDIS Commission or someone commissioned by the NDIS Commission. That's potentially going to be mandatory, and that's going to reduce the variability in the quality of navigation organisations and improve service quality. I guess the risk that I see, and I know a lot of other people have spoken about this, I've read a few articles on LinkedIn, is that the tenders for navigation may only be awarded to larger sort of partners in the community organisations, like in WA, that's APM and Mission Australia. That would remove the right of choice and control for participants and families to choose the person or organisation that's going to help them to navigate through the NDIS. I definitely think greater consistency and lower variability in the quality of support coordination slash navigation is needed, but not at the expense of removing participant choice in forcing smaller, independent and innovative providers from the market. I've also seen greater focus on fraud detection. With Bill Shorten back at the helm, the NDIS have a fraud detection task force. I read that the estimates are 1 in every $5, so approximately 20% they think of dollars spent in the NDIS are fraud, and as a result of unethical provider behaviour. So there's some increased scrutiny aiming to protect participants and ensuring that funds are used appropriately. This does have a secondary consequence of adding to the compliance and regulatory burden for providers as well. So providers now have to implement more robust internal controls and conduct regular internal audits and stay vigilant against fraudulent activities. So I do think these measures are necessary for the scheme. Yeah, it does help level the playing field and weed out bad actors. Obviously there's that high compliance cost, but I think as a provider, that's just the cost of doing business, I think. And hopefully the sector gets cleaned up as the marketplace continues to mature. There's more crackdowns on unethical behaviour that will sort of weed out any providers doing the wrong thing. The SDA market is also another interesting one to watch. There's a lot of hype and a lot of investment from superannuation funds and even from overseas investors out of Asia and other countries looking at the higher potential rental yields that you can get from SDA. And that's undergoing significant changes as that market matures. Supply and demand dynamics are shifting. There's opportunities and challenges, and there's also markets within the SDA market itself. So there's 4 design categories of SDA: high physical support, robust, improved livability, and another one that I can't quite remember at the moment. But within those markets, there may be, I know that there's quite strong supply for high physical support, say 1-bedroom apartments, because investors have looked at that and said, oh, what's the most bang for my buck? One person, not sharing with others, and high physical support for participants with the highest disability needs. That's what's going to attract the most funding from the National Disability Insurance Agency when they're putting together plans. So all the investors have rushed in, put all their money into 1-bedroom apartments with high physical support. Of course, that's meant that there's been a potential oversupply of that particular SDA design category and that particular dwelling, not shared. We're seeing a lot of home and living decisions come from the NDIA that are a 3-person share, so 3 people with disabilities supported by support workers. And we're not seeing all high physical support. We're seeing some of the lower design categories for lower disability support needs come through as well. So that's another one to watch this space. Recent developments in the SDA market have included efforts to increase supply through new construction projects and also not just building new dwellings, but also retrofitting existing properties as well. So it's a complex one for investors, and I think that some of the complexities aren't always fleshed out in some, I've seen on some websites of SDA investment companies trying to attract investment, just promoting the potential high yields, but not really delving into the complex regulations and funding mechanisms required to deliver these services, matching participants with the right design category, building referral relationships, making sure the homes that are built meet the stringent SDA requirements. So I think that market is beginning to mature, and NDIS participants themselves, as there's more choice and that's starting to settle, are looking for more bespoke and homely accommodation to live in rather than more hospital-like, efficient to build, standardized homes built at scale with a more institutional feel. And I've seen with some of the participants that we support really big impacts from even small, low-cost changes and strategies. The provider seeking input from the participant that's going to be moving in to participate in some aspects of the design or furnishing, choosing their color of paint, even making some changes to the bathroom with grab rails and things like that to just make sure that it doesn't have that hospital institutional feel and it just feels like someone's home that they're going to live in. And The recent removal of sex work is another thing that's been in the media and in the headlines. Bill Shorten came out and said he was going to rule out sex work services from the definition of reasonable and necessary supports in the NDIS, which has really sparked considerable debate. It was on the 7pm, the project, the show. They had some disability advocates on there and they were discussing this. It does affect a really small percentage of NDIS participants, so it's not really going to move the needle in terms of scheme sustainability, and it doesn't affect a large amount of people, but it's been met with really strong resistance from the disability community and being quite controversial. And I think the disability community are understandably worried that it reflects an overall narrowing of the NDIS support definitions around what's a reasonable and necessary support by ruling that out completely. It's ruling supports out rather than looking in a sort of black and white manner, rather than looking at someone's individual circumstances and their needs and their goals, and then from there making a reasonable and necessary decision. Lastly, the sustainability of the NDIS and projected growth. That's something that's been an ongoing challenge for years. The cost of the NDIS is far greater than we had anticipated. The federal budget released this year by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has committed to an annual growth rate target rate of 8% for the NDIS by July 2026. Details of how that will be achieved is contained within the NDIS Financial Sustainability Framework. As competition increases, we as providers need to balance the need for growth and trying to grow our business with the imperative to focus on delivering high quality services and carving out our niche, especially with scheme sustainability and funding and NDIS plans going through a more stringent decision-making process, with potentially that narrowing of the scheme's support definitions, increased competition, and that's going to mean that as providers we need to invest in staff training, technology and infrastructure to support sustainable expansion, but also balancing this with price freezes and rising operational costs. So our future as a sector really depends on our ability to adapt to these changing conditions, improve our service delivery, and also innovate and change our business model to be more lean and agile. So that's some of the things I've been thinking about. I just thought I'd get behind the mic and brainstorm some of that. I think it's a really interesting time. It's also a really challenging time for providers. It's a time of disruption. It's a time of change. It's a time of squeezing profit margins. So I think it's an opportunity to just take a step back and discuss internally how we can continue to grow and what perhaps we need to let go and what we maybe need to focus on as our niche, consolidate our services. Can we collaborate with other providers to share some admin costs or back of office costs and continue to survive and hopefully thrive in the years to come. Thanks for listening this week, and I'll see you again next week on the NDIS Circle. Bye for now.